Jujutsu Kaisen, the anime that took the world by storm last year. Every week, one spectacular episode after the next. Everyone and their grandmother was tuning in. If you weren't, you're either lying or you were just trying to be different. Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2 was spectacular, not just in animation, but also in writing. The amount of moments executed perfectly made this season feel like something truly special. I wonder what was happening during the manga at this time. Stories can fall off, and it's something you gotta accept, but it hurts even more when it's something you truly enjoy reading. Jujutsu Kaisen, unfortunately, fell off. It quite possibly had one of the best arcs in shonen manga, and now probably has the worst ending. I'd be lying if I said it fell off entirely in one chapter. I think we all know the chapter, but this solidified my true abhorrence towards Gege Akutami. But how did we get to this point? Shibuya, hands down the pinnacle of the JJK story. This is the moment where most would realize that this isn't just some other shonen. The amount of twists and turns, foreshadowing and fights, everything was great. I would say this arc was a 10 out of 10, if only the ending didn't feel so unsatisfactory. It wasn't a bad ending, it just felt kind of underwhelming with everything going on previously in the arc. And after this you would expect the next arc to be just as engaging and good as the previous? No, this is the beginning of the downfall. Culling Games. This arc had potential, too bad it was a snooze fest. Most of the fights just feel like they are placed there to give a sense of entertainment without actually providing anything to the actual story. Sure, about 3 of them were pretty decent, but none were outstanding. I do say, the ending to this arc was pretty damn interesting. Seeing a plot twist that was built up from the first volume all the way to chapter 212 was satisfying as hell. Unfortunately, in the next chapter, Gege decides to become trash at writing. The angel appears out of nowhere after Sukuna obliterates Yuji. Sukuna feels true fear in this instance. Is this really how Sukuna is going to die?
Megami! I want Megami!
Hana, it's me. Megami.
Megami! Megami! I love you, Megami! I love you!
You seriously can't make this shit up. Firstly, what the hell is this drawing? I guess it's Sukuna's biting technique he hasn't used since the Heian era, huh? Secondly, how can you write characters this incredibly stupid? The only thing Megami ever did for you was help you when he was like 6. You practically have a middle school crush on him, and that caused you to become delusional to an extreme. Thanks, Gege, for writing unrealistic characters. Thankfully, after this, her character did something that will forever go down as the greatest comeback in all of manga. The return of Satoru Gojo. This is the legendary segue from Culling Games to Shinjuku. Doesn't make up for how much poorer the entirety of the arc felt. One thing I thought this arc was being used for was setting stuff up for the conclusion of the story. The merger, US invasion, Angel, and the randoms in combat were all set up this arc. How many had actual follow-throughs? 1. You set up characters and brought some of them back. Glad it wasn't all of them. It'd be kind of annoying if random people showed up in the final fight just to drag it out. Huh. Funny. After this arc is when the real fun begins. Demon Infested Shinjuku. Both Gojo and Sukuna aren't fully prepared for their final fight, so they agree on a date to have their battle. Christmas Eve. When the day comes, the battle starts with a chant. 9 ropes, polarized light, crow in declaration, between front and back, hollow, purple. Insane start to an amazing fight. Gojo takes off his sweater and is rocking the fit of the one person who has defeated him in the past. The second best moment of Gojo compared to this one. The entire next chapter is straight fighting. Almost no exposition. This is honestly probably one of the best chapters in the entire manga. The paneling is amazing and the art is, well, it's Gege. You can't really... A domain clash between the strongest. Who's gonna win? Gojo, no! Gojo gets absolutely destroyed by Sukuna's domain, but he's the strongest. Starts beating up Sukuna and pops a simple domain to heal. He ends up getting destroyed again, and speed blitzes Sukuna.
Who's my good little kitten?
I am.
And he hits Sukuna with a point blank red, evening the score. After a couple more domain clashes and a lot more fighting, Gojo does something unthinkable. Stuns Sukuna with Infinite Void. It seems like Gojo is going to actually win.
Maharaga! Help! Help!
Sukuna somehow manages to summon Maharaga on Gojo, and he's already adapted to Gojo's technique. Turns out the reason for this is because Megami's soul is taking on Infinite Void. How could he come back from this? If he somehow does manage to survive, he'd have to be brain dead or something. Anyways, Gojo tries to open his domain again, but he's reached his limit. Sukuna makes fun of him for this, but his clown ass fails his domain even worse. Real world combat from here on out. Gojo is just straight up toying with Sukuna until he starts adapting. Gojo continues his attacks, hoping to beat Sukuna before he can adapt to his abilities. He starts pulling out new techniques never before seen and sneak attacks right in front of him, just to hit him with a black flash and knocking him unconscious. Maharaga returns and he's not happy Gojo hurt his son. They duke it out until Sukuna wakes back up, and him being the coward he is makes it a 3-on-1. Maharaga and Nue attack him with an onslaught of barrages until, yeah, Gojo's gonna lose. Sukuna decides to show up now that Gojo is missing an arm, and Gojo absolutely obliterates Nue with blue. Gojo then heals his arm like a badass and continues to beat them, gaining a gap in between them until he utters Phase, Parametia, Pillars of Light, Curse Technique Reversal.
Maharaga! Help! Help!
Phase, Twilight, Eyes of Wisdom, 9 Ropes, Polarized Light, Crow and Declaration, between front and back, Hollow, Purple. It is certain Gojo wins. What happened? Yo, why are Gojo and Geto talking? Gojo, why are you talking in the past tense? Aren't all these guys dead? How to ruin your manga in one chapter. Way to end one of the best fights in manga, period. What do? Off-screen the most beloved character in the entire story. I laughed the first time I saw this, but it's not supposed to be funny. You're supposed to feel sad over this. How are you supposed to feel sad over an off-screen? You know, narratively, Gojo dying makes sense. It's something to be expected because you can't have the deuteragonist take the protagonist's shining moment. But the way his death was handled is what actually just pisses me off. You built up this fight since chapter 2, and what do you do with it? Butcher it. I will still argue this fight is amazing, but the ending just sets it off from other, much more satisfying and emotionally touching battles. This is just a spit in the face to the genuine fans of your show. And people legitimately tried to defend this, talking about themes in this chapter. Do you think I care about themes? Maybe he should do something like have an emotional build-up before Gojo dies, or a moment where Sukuna realizes he's going to win and Gojo realizes he's going to die. Also, the entire death just feels so Deus Ex Machina. You know, I'm starting to think Gege off-screened him because he couldn't picture Gojo actually making the mistake of losing to Sukuna. You have the strongest character in the show overpower Sukuna, he is burned and missing an arm, and somehow he pulls an attack straight out of his ass that can cut space itself. How did he learn this? Apparently Maharaga told it to him. Alright, I'd be lying if I said you could completely ruin your story before the ending is supposed to happen. But this chapter is just the exposition of ass for the rest of the entire story. The rest of the story. It pretty much follows this format. Someone shows up, hits a cool attack on Sukuna, then gets low diff by him. This is repeated about 13 times. 2 of these were actually pretty amazing. The rest were either mildly interesting or not needed in the story at all. I get you wrote a lot of your characters, and sometimes you have to give those characters some screen time, but when it interrupts the entire flow of your climax, it begins to get repetitive and annoying. Also, maybe don't write such powerful characters and then have Itadori be so weak. It feels like the only reason he lives is because of plot. Don't get me wrong, he has to live. I think Itadori dying while fighting Sukuna would be horrendous. But during the final stretch with Todo, he only got hit in 1 chapter, and that was only used to build up hype for a domain expansion he pulled out of his ass. Oh, it's also unnamed, by the way. but it just isn't thrilling enough. The amount of straight ass pulls too. Like, how did Itadori learn Dismantle halfway through his fight? He could have been using this from the start apparently. And don't get me started on Nobara. Her coming back is probably top 3 worst decisions Gege could have pulled. She died. Don't try and say she didn't or it was vague. It was not vague in the slightest. Her death had an actual impact on Itadori in the story, one of the saddest in the show, and what do? Bring her back to hit a pointless attack on Sukuna. Gege probably wrote his story on the fly, because it feels like he didn't plan any of this out. Another thing that I felt was terrible was bringing Yuta back in Gojo's body. You put one of the most bland characters in the body of someone with one of the biggest egos in the series. And what does he do with it? Hits a Timu Hollow Purple and dies. And you know what? He doesn't even suffer the consequences of doing this technique. He is perfectly fine and even back in his own body after this. And the final 5 chapters are just what truly cements this as being a bad ending. Sukuna's conclusion with Itadori is 3 pages. Way too anticlimactic. This is the main villain, and the best thing you can say is, "You are me?" It doesn't even work in this scenario. Gege really thought he cooked with this one. Itadori then states that he wants to live side by side with Sukuna. How does this make sense? This is the same man that murders people for the hell of it. Don't you remember when he laughed as he watched your friend die in your arms as he could have saved him? I get forgiveness, but it just doesn't make sense. When did Itadori have this character development? Because he wasn't acting anything like this with Mahito, and after Shibuya, the story barely even focused on this aspect of him at all. Also, where was Hikari's fight? You gave him one genuine fight in the entire manga, and just sidelined him for the final fight as if he's not an important character. Show him losing, or show him winning. Don't just have another lame ass off screen. After this, Megami somehow is alive. I would understand this if he didn't tank like 5 Infinite Voids. But no, my head's a little foggy because of Infinite Void. You should be dead. A whole bunch of random stuff is talked about, like the lore of simple domains, and a lot of excuses for Gege's poor writing. They set a little bit up in the second to last chapter, just for nothing. I pray it's not a part 2, it's bad either way. And in the final chapter, Sukuna has this come to Jesus moment with this crazy, unwarranted character development, only after he died. This scene actually would have been so good for his character if only he had a better conclusion with Itadori. It's sad, but this is the end. So many questions left unanswered, so many plot lines that led to nothing, and guess what the last page is? Gege giving the reader the good old finger. If you thought this ending was good, I greatly disagree. But hey, we all have different taste, and we shouldn't get so mad over what someone says online about it. But it's also my birthday, so I get a pass. And to everyone that was posting spoilers without a spoiler warning 4 days before the chapter would even drop, I hope you have a good day, but just know I still don't like you. Anyways, don't read JJK, read Isogui, stay humble, and subscribe.